One of the things about Nay is that she's going to play her butt off, man. She's going to compete. Nobody's going to go walking in for a layup. And so I don't oppose the hard foul, but I also don't think that she intentionally went for the net. One of the things about Nay is that she's going to play her butt off, man. She's going to compete. Nobody's going to go walking in for a layup. And so I don't oppose the hard foul, but I also don't think that she intentionally went for the net.
That answer is why this story exploded. Stephanie White was asked about a flagrant foul that left Sophie Cunningham bloodied, and instead of condemning the contact, she defended the competitiveness behind it. The real question is whether that was calm coaching under pressure, or a moment that told her own locker room something much bigger.
WNBA player Dejanay Carrington blames, quote, white privilege after being ejected for a hard foul on Sophie Cunningham. Carrington was given a flagrant 2 foul and was immediately ejected. She then rushed back to the locker room so she could blame white privilege. This was the play.
Face coming down, trying to prevent the layup, but that is just...
Clearly not going for the ball. 2 hands going for Sophie Cunningham's head. Sophie Cunningham gets up, not too excited about it. Gets up bleeding with blood in her mouth.
Now look at the sequence that created all of this. Dejanay Carrington was assessed a flagrant 2 and ejected after the contact to Cunningham's upper body and head area. Cunningham gets back up, but she is visibly hurt, and that immediately changes the conversation from normal physical basketball to player safety. There is an important distinction here. You can believe Carrington was trying to stop an easy scoring opportunity without automatically believing every piece of contact was intentional. Basketball moves fast. Players miss time challenges. Bodies collide. But once officials review something and upgrade it to a flagrant 2, the discussion is no longer about whether there was contact. The league's officials already determined that the play crossed the threshold for ejection, and that is what made White's response so fascinating. She did not have to accuse Carrington of deliberately trying to injure anybody. She did not have to turn the press conference into a personal attack. But there was a massive amount of space between saying, "I don't believe she intended to hit Sophie in the neck," and sounding almost comfortable with the hard foul itself. That space is where this controversy lives. Because coaches are not just evaluating basketball plays. They are sending messages to their players about where the organization stands when one of them gets hit. And later, when you hear how fans reacted to White's exact wording, you can understand why this became much more than one foul.
I don't oppose the hard foul, and I don't think intentionally she went for the neck. I do oppose the hard foul, and I do think she intentionally went for the neck.
That is the disagreement in one sentence. White says she does not oppose the hard foul and does not believe the neck contact was intentional. Critics hear the first half and ask, why even go there? Think about the easier answer available to her. I know Dejanay competes hard. I don't know her intent. But Sophie took significant contact, and I'm glad she's okay. Done. Nobody can reasonably accuse you of inventing motive. Nobody can say you abandon your player. You protect both principles at once. Instead, White chose language that emphasized Carrington's competitiveness before emphasizing what happened to Cunningham. That may sound like a tiny wording issue, but locker rooms live on details like that. Players remember which coach demands accountability when they get hit. They remember which teammate walks across the floor during a confrontation. They remember who says something publicly afterward. And that becomes even more important with Cunningham because her reputation since joining Indiana has been tied heavily to physicality and willingness to confront opponents. Whether fans like her style or hate it, she has made it clear she is not interested in watching teammates get roughed up without responding. So when that same player ends up on the receiving end, the standard suddenly becomes very interesting.
If that was Sophie Cunningham in place of Caitlin Clark, and Caitlin Clark got clotheslined in the face, do you think Sophie Cunningham would need to get a question addressed to her to speak out and defend Cece and set the record straight? No, Sophie Cunningham, she'd make it her business. Yeah, I know you didn't ask me this question, but that was a dirty play. I know you didn't ask me this question, that was a bad foul. That was a hard foul. That was an unnecessary foul. The league needs to take care of that.
And that hypothetical gets to the emotional center of the backlash. Cunningham has built enormous goodwill with a section of the Fever fan base because they see her as somebody willing to do the uncomfortable stuff. She talks, she confronts, she absorbs criticism. She brings edge to a team that has spent a huge amount of time under a microscope. So some fans are now asking whether that loyalty runs both directions. That does not mean Caitlin Clark or another teammate needed to grab a microphone and accuse Carrington of intentionally attacking Cunningham. Nobody should be pressured into making a claim they cannot know. Intent is difficult to prove from one replay. But there is another option. Defend the teammate without pretending to read the opponent's mind. You can say the hit was excessive. You can say Sophie deserved protection. You can say the league needs consistency. You can say you are glad she got back up. Those statements are about your teammate, not Carrington's internal motives. And this is the part that should bother Indiana more than social media body language analysis. Whether someone covered her mouth or looked sideways during a press conference is speculation. The meaningful evidence is what people actually say and do after incidents like this. Watch what White's critics focused on next, because the conversation quickly became less about facial expressions and more about leadership.
For defending an opponent for clothesline one of his players, I would call him to be fired. Here we go. Look at the player's body language. I'm not sure that what Coach White endgame is in saying this. I'm confident she might lose some players' respect in saying this. This is wild. You have to fight for your players. Again, I don't even want to read into the player's body language. I want to read into the players going out of their way to defending Sophie Cunningham.
That is a much stronger criticism than trying to decode somebody's face frame by frame. Body language is ambiguous. A player touching her mouth can mean surprise, frustration, discomfort, nothing at all. Building an entire story around that is shaky. But asking what a coach should communicate publicly after a flagrant 2? That is fair. White had an unusually complicated position here because she has history with Carrington from Connecticut. She coached her. She knows the kind of player she is. She probably has a much better personal understanding of Carrington's competitive temperament than most people watching the replay online. That context may explain why White was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt on intent. But coaching your current team requires a different calculation. The Fever players standing beside White are not asking whether she still respects a former player. They are watching how she responds when someone wearing Indiana colors gets hurt. That is why this cannot simply be dismissed as fans wanting coaches to scream at officials. There is a leadership question underneath it. When personal familiarity with an opponent meets responsibility to your current roster, which instinct should be louder? White tried to separate the hard foul from intentional neck contact. Conceptually, that is defensible. You can support physical defense while believing the dangerous part happened accidentally. The problem is optics. When your player is bleeding, nuance has to be delivered extremely carefully.
I said this yesterday during my post game. I don't care what her expression on her face was. This is the coach that was DeJournette's coach when DeJournette poked Caitlin Clark in the eye rookie season. This was the coach that the first game of the year, DeJournette Carrington hip checked Caitlin Clark in the middle of the game. This is the same coach that watched over Marina Mabry body tackle Caitlin Clark into the seats. This is the same coach that defended Alyssa Thomas's fist and throat. This coach is completely okay with it.
And this is where the history surrounding White gets pulled into the argument. Critics are connecting this response to previous physical incidents involving Caitlin Clark and opponents White has coached or knows from earlier stops. Some of those incidents were officiated differently, involved completely different circumstances, and should not all be treated as identical. But perception does not wait for a courtroom-level standard of evidence. Once supporters believe there is a pattern of Indiana stars taking hard contact without enough public pushback, every new incident becomes evidence in the larger story they already think they are watching. That is dangerous for a coach. Not because online commenters determine your rotation or your game plan, but because the same perception can eventually reach the locker room. Players do not need a coach who fights every battle publicly. In fact, good coaches often protect teams by refusing to feed controversy. But there is a difference between de-escalation and appearing detached. White's challenge is finding that line. And before anybody jumps straight to fire the coach, remember that one press conference answer does not tell us everything happening internally. We do not know what she said to Cunningham privately. We do not know what conversations happened with officials, team staff, or the league. Those unknowns matter. Still, public leadership matters too, because a head coach is the organizational voice immediately after emotional moments. And White's public voice here clearly did not land the way a lot of Fever supporters expected.
Folks, when I first saw this, I said this must be AI. When I first saw Stephanie White stick up for DeJournette Carrington, I said this must be AI. Look at Sophie Cunningham, bleeding out the mouth. Jason Willock, I mean, he says he's done. I will never utter a word in Stephanie White's defense again. Never. She's sick, must be fired. What a joke. For a coach so openly disregard her own players' safety is absolute insanity. Stephanie White is an embarrassment. Is this real?
That reaction is extreme, but it shows you how badly the quote landed. The criticism moved almost immediately from, "I disagree with Stephanie White," to "How can this possibly be Cunningham's own coach?" And once people reach that point, the story stops being about officiating and becomes a referendum on trust. Here is the counter-argument White's defenders would make. A head coach should not automatically call an opponent dirty just because officials issued a flagrant foul. Flagrant classifications judge the contact, not necessarily a player's state of mind. White knows Carrington personally, knows how aggressively she competes, and may genuinely believe the dangerous contact was a byproduct of the attempt to stop the play. That is completely possible. But here is where the answer still falls short. She could have expressed that belief after establishing support for Cunningham. Order matters. Sophie took a bad hit. We never want to see that. I don't believe Dejanay intended the neck contact, but the officials reviewed it and made their decision. That sounds dramatically different from leading with how Carrington competes and saying you do not oppose a hard foul. Same basic interpretation of intent, completely different message to your roster. Coaches spend entire seasons talking about culture, togetherness, and playing for one another. Moments like this are where those phrases get tested, not when everybody is winning, not when the team is smiling after a comfortable victory. When somebody gets hit, emotions spike, cameras are on, and you have seconds to decide what your public priority is.
I'm sorry, I can't ignore this. I can't ignore it because I know exactly if it was flipped how it would be. Your piece of shit coach defends racist opponents, beating the shit out of her own players. Fire her. Indiana Fever need to let Stephanie White go. No solid coach would ever take the side of the opposing team's player who committed a flagrant foul on one of your own players. Terrible coaching. The Fever need to defend their players. And here we go. Caitlin's body language says it all.
And now we get to another layer, consistency. Fans are not just reacting to one incident in isolation. They are comparing how physical plays involving Indiana are discussed depending on who commits the foul and who receives it. That comparison can become distorted very quickly. Social media rewards the hottest possible interpretation. A reckless play becomes an intentional attack. A bad coaching quote becomes proof of betrayal. One player's silence becomes evidence that an entire team is divided. Most of those leaps go further than the facts support. But underneath the exaggeration is a reasonable demand. Apply the same standard. If you want opponents to be judged fairly when they hit your player, your own team has to accept the same scrutiny when the situation reverses. And Sophie Cunningham understands that better than almost anybody, because she has been at the center of physical incidents herself. That is why her role makes this story so compelling. She is not a player whose public identity is built around avoiding confrontation. She embraces it. She has repeatedly presented herself as somebody comfortable with basketball getting uncomfortable. So the strongest defense of Cunningham here cannot be, nobody should ever hit Sophie hard. That would be hypocritical. The stronger position is, hard basketball has limits, and once head or neck contact pushes a play into flagrant 2 territory, everybody deserves the same protection. That principle works no matter which jersey somebody is wearing.
Head out loud. Defend the one player in this league that's actually gone out of the way to defend you. Sophie Cunningham, by the way, tweeted white privilege, right? Sophie Cunningham, by the way, tweeted white privilege after this play. League policy, you're banned from electronics or posting online until all post-game media obligations are fulfilled. So is Dejanay Carrington going to get reprimanded or suspended or face any consequences?
That social media angle created another controversy almost immediately. The source commentary says Cunningham posted white privilege afterward, apparently responding to Carrington's own post-game framing. The source also raises a question about league rules regarding electronic activity before media obligations are completed. But unless the league publicly announces discipline, speculation about punishment should stay exactly that. Speculation. What matters more is what that exchange tells us about the temperature surrounding this matchup. This was not treated like an ordinary hard foul that everybody forgot after the final buzzer. Race entered the conversation. Privilege entered the conversation. Old rivalries entered the conversation. Indiana's internal culture entered the conversation. And suddenly one physical play was carrying all the baggage surrounding the WNBA's most closely scrutinized players and teams. That is precisely why leadership becomes so important. A coach cannot control every tweet. She cannot stop fans from assigning motives. She cannot prevent opponents from saying provocative things, but she can control the clarity of her own message. And this is where we finally get closer to the real issue with White's response. The problem is not simply that she refused to call Carrington dirty. She should not make that accusation unless she actually believes it. The problem is that she left enough ambiguity that supporters heard more empathy for the opponent's intentions than concern for her own player's experience. That is a communication failure, even if every charitable interpretation of White's intentions is true.
Stephanie White goes on the podium and refuses to back up her player, Sophie Cunningham. Stephanie White, like we've said this time and time again, a snake in the grass. She needs to go. She needs to get fired. She refused to stand up for Caitlin Clark when Caitlin Clark got a fist in her throat. And then we went through the whole I ride for you. Hey, Stephanie, I'll tell you this right now. Something tells me that Sophie Cunningham, she's not going to come out and practice and say, I ride for... She's not going to do that.
The source commentary goes much further, calling White names and suggesting she should be fired. There are also personal allegations elsewhere in the source that are unsupported and irrelevant to evaluating this basketball decision, so they should not be treated as fact. Strip all of that away, and the basketball question is still serious enough on its own. Should White lose her job because of this answer? Based on this alone, coaches should be judged on the total operation: wins, losses, player development, tactical decisions, locker room management, health, adjustments, postseason results, and whether the team believes in the direction of the program. But should the Fever care about how this moment landed? Absolutely, because Indiana is not operating like an anonymous franchise anymore. Every Caitlin Clark game becomes national conversation. Every hard foul gets replayed hundreds of thousands of times. Every press conference is clipped. Every ambiguous sentence can dominate the next news cycle. That means the margin for sloppy communication is tiny. White does not need to become performative. She does not have to turn every press conference into professional wrestling. But when a player takes a hit severe enough to produce an ejection, the safest leadership approach is simple. Protect your player first, discuss intent second. That is not tribalism. That is coaching.
You can see both of them are having to work real hard to contain themselves. Hit her head on purpose. Black fatigue, Jesus. It says nothing. Say it out loud, CC. Yeah, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. I know that might sound a little harsh, but that's where I'm at. Say it out loud. Defend the one player in this league that's actually gone out of the way to defend you.
And this is where Caitlin Clark gets dragged back into the conversation. Some fans want her to publicly defend Cunningham because Cunningham has earned a reputation for standing up for Clark. Emotionally, you can understand why supporters want reciprocity. But demanding a specific public statement from Clark creates another trap. If she comments aggressively, the story immediately becomes Caitlin Clark escalating another WNBA controversy. If she stays measured, people accuse her of abandoning a teammate. If she says nothing, fans analyze her facial expressions instead. That is an impossible standard. Clark can support Cunningham privately, during games, inside the locker room, and through how she behaves on the court. We should be careful about pretending we know those relationships solely through press conferences. But there is one reason this still matters for Clark. Great teams develop an identity around protecting each other without losing discipline. That does not mean retaliation. Retaliation gets players suspended and hurts the team. It means teammates helping each other up, communicating with officials, making legal physical plays, coaches taking technical fouls when strategically appropriate, veterans speaking when the moment calls for it, and organizational leadership making it obvious that safety concerns will be addressed. Cunningham's arrival gave Indiana more edge. The question now is whether that edge belongs to one player or whether it becomes part of the team's collective identity. Because if Sophie is always expected to be the enforcer, eventually she becomes the easiest person to bait into trouble. The smarter version of toughness is shared responsibility.
See, this coach doesn't have your back. And you got to start realizing that this coach doesn't have your back. Nobody on this team actually has your back except for Sophie Cunningham. Nobody on this team, coaches, players, has ever shown that they have your back, that they're ever willing to actually speak out for you other than Sophie Cunningham. So one of these days, I'm asking you, you're gonna have to speak up for Sophie Cunningham. One of these days.
That is the harshest version of the criticism, and I would push back on one part of it. Saying nobody on Indiana has Clark's back goes too far. We cannot know every conversation inside that locker room, and support does not always look like confrontation. But the broader question is worth asking. What does having someone's back actually mean in professional basketball? Is it starting fights? Obviously not. Is it calling every opponent dirty? Is it responding to obvious physicality with composure, presence, and clear public standards? That is much closer. The Fever are trying to balance two competing realities. They need to protect their stars in a league where teams will absolutely test them physically, and they need to avoid becoming emotionally reactive every time an opponent crosses the line. That balance is hard. The best teams manage it without looking passive. They make opponents understand there is a cost to easy drives. They communicate constantly. They use physicality legally. They make referees aware of recurring contact. They refuse to let frustration pull them out of the game. Then the coach handles the rest. Which is why White's quote mattered more than it may have seemed in the moment. It represented the final layer of that protection system, and many fans believed it failed.
Gary Callahan can't even believe this. Is this Sophie Cunningham's coach? No fucking way. The WNBA has the worst group of people in the world. I've never seen this before in my line of watching sports. Well, you've never seen a coach that came into the league, got turned out, and now her allegiance lies with the black lesbian mafia. Yeah, that's Stephanie White. Wow, if the Sonics came back and the head coach were defending an opponent for clothesline one of his players, I would call him to be fired. Here we go. Look at the player's body language. I'm not sure that what Coach White endgame is in saying this. I'm confident she might lose some players' respect in saying this. This is wild. You have to fight for your players.
So now we can finally answer the question this entire controversy created. Did Stephanie White actually choose Dejanai Carrington over Sophie Cunningham? There is not enough evidence to say that. What she did was give Carrington the benefit of the doubt on intent, while speaking in a way that many people felt did not sufficiently prioritize Cunningham after a dangerous foul. Those are not the same accusation. One is betrayal. The other is poor messaging. And based on the public evidence we have, poor messaging is the much stronger case. That distinction matters because sports commentary gets useless when every questionable decision becomes proof that somebody secretly hates their own player. White has history with Carrington. She clearly respects the way Carrington competes. She also coaches Cunningham now. Those two facts can coexist. The mistake was failing to communicate the second responsibility as strongly as the first relationship, and now Indiana has a choice in how it responds. They can dismiss the entire controversy as online noise and hope the next game buries it. Or White can make the standard clearer going forward through her words and actions. Physical basketball is part of the league, but Indiana will advocate for its players when contact crosses the line. That would end most of this immediately. No dramatic apology needed. No attack on Carrington needed. Just clarity. Because this Fever team is under too much scrutiny for ambiguity to survive very long. Every hard foul becomes a referendum. Every quote becomes a loyalty test. Every silence becomes a conspiracy theory. The only defense against that environment is consistency. And that is what I will be watching next. Not somebody's hand covering their mouth. Not a 5-second facial expression. Not anonymous speculation about locker room drama. Watch what happens the next time Cunningham or Clark absorbs dangerous contact. Watch how quickly teammates respond. Watch what White says. Watch whether the standard changes. That will tell us far more than any freeze frame ever could. Because if White comes out strongly for her players the next time, then this becomes one poorly phrased answer that got amplified by an already emotional rivalry. But if the same pattern repeats, if opponents receive immediate benefit of the doubt while Indiana players receive silence, then the criticism becomes harder to dismiss. And Sophie Cunningham may be the perfect test case. She has already shown that she is willing to play the role of protector. Now fans want to know whether the organization is willing to protect her with the same energy. So choose a side on the actual question. Was Stephanie White simply trying to be fair about Carrington's intent, or did she fail the most basic public test of standing behind Sophie Cunningham after a flagrant 2? Drop your answer in the comments, like the video if you want more Fever breakdowns without the fake body language theories, and subscribe because the next response from this team could tell us whether this controversy disappears or becomes something much bigger.